Welcome to the ALCTS webinar on Library of Congress BIBFRAME Progress. I am Miriam Nauenberg, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. I will be your host for today's webinar. Today's webinar will have 4 presenters from the Library of Congress. Sally McCallum is the Chief of the Network Development and MARC Standards Office at the Library of Congress. The Network Development and MARC Standards Office manages the Library of Congress BIBFRAME initiative. Judith Cannan is the Chief of the Cooperative and Instructional Programs Division at the Library of Congress. The Cooperative and Instructional Programs Division is responsible for BIBFRAME training at the Library of Congress. Kevin Ford is a librarian, linked data technical specialist at the Library of Congress, where he also worked from 2010 to 2014 in the Network Development and MARC Standards Office. He currently works on BIBFRAME, focusing recently on how best to bring efficiency to the library's BIBFRAME dataset for the purposes of scale. And Paul Frank is Cooperative Cataloging Specialist, LC BIBFRAME Trainer, and BIBFRAME Editor Profile Contact at the Library of Congress. Each of our presenters brings much expertise to today's topic, and we're fortunate to have them with us today. A few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise, and we do not have interactive chat capabilities. You may, however, comment on today's presentation using Twitter. The hashtag is ALCTSCE. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so if you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box on your screen. We will have time for questions after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides shortly after the presentation concludes. And now we'll turn it over to Judith. There will be a slight delay while we change presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being interested in BIBFRAME. Well, there we are, and I'm leading off, Judith Cannan. I want to start, before I talk about the goals, the BIBFRAME goals, I want to start by saying a few words about BIBFRAME. I want to clarify its purpose. BIBFRAME was never envisioned as a cataloger's tool only. It was designed intentionally to accept any metadata used to describe any type of item, no matter what instructions are used to describe the item. Currently, though, BIBFRAME is focusing on items described by catalogers, as that is our primary audience, but the vocabulary is designed to accommodate a broader audience. The ABA director has goals. Each year we set BIBFRAME goals. And right now we're in FY19, fiscal year 2019. So I'm going to address the director's goals. But first of all, I want to say to you that BIBFRAME at the Library of Congress is considered a mega APG. That means an annual performance goal. And as such, it means that the director of Acquisitions and Bibliographic Access, Beecher Wiggins, has to report to the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, twice a year on the progress made with BIBFRAME. Now, his goals are first to expand the BIBFRAME 2.0 pilot to 100 active participants. Now, currently, there are 48 participants. So we've got to add 52 more participants before the end of the fiscal year, which ends on September the 30th, 2019. And we're not allowed to count section hits. So we've got a lot of work facing us. He also wants to make sure that we can import records from external sources because we have a very large copy cataloging workflow. And we can't really move this workflow forward in BIBFRAME unless we can import records from external sources. Because LC has been developing this tool, it hasn't had much time to do anything else. But now things are getting more settled, and it's time for LC to look at the discovery aspects of BIBFRAME. So we will be doing that in this coming year, and we need to see how the public will and others will interact with BIBFRAME and take advantage of linked data. We're also hoping to get some help in this area from the PCC, because some of these libraries will be working in BIBFRAME. But hand in hand with this discovery is how to make the BIBFRAME database available for public consumption. Currently, the public does not have access to IDLOC.gov, but the focus here is on vocabularies. In order for BIBFRAME to move forward, the Network Development and MARC Standards Office, known affectionately here as NBMSO, and the Cooperative and Instructional Programs Division, affectionately known as COIN, have to work very closely together. We need to have a dynamic working relationship in order to carry out the tasks facing us. And we have the tasks that I'm going to address right now are ones that we're working on together. So every week, select COIN and NBMSO staff members meet weekly to keep current with BIBFRAME and keep the development moving forward. But this year, in addition, we're going to start monthly meetings with the LC BIBFRAME pilot participants. We need to do this to keep them engaged and motivated. At the same time, we'll also be working with LD4P on training and collaborating with technical issues. LD4P is being spearheaded by Stanford University, and with the latest Mellon grant, 17 PCC institutions that submitted proposals have been selected to work in Sinopia BIBFRAME Editor. Sinopia is being developed by Stanford, and NBMSO staff members are assisting with technical issues, and COIN is providing initial training. NDSO has three major tasks facing it this year. They're the BIBFRAME database, the BIBFRAME editor, and the BIBFRAME conversion. The BIBFRAME database is not a simple matter. It takes considerable work and exploration to improve that database. They're going to do another full conversion of the MARC file. And we're talking about over 19 million records now. So this is a huge undertaking. And then they want to compare the results from converting from MARC to BIBFRAME with Castellini's work in this area, because they're converting MARC records to BIBFRAME too. And they also need to import these external BIBFRAME descriptions. And because in a linked data world, unless you can import these BIBFRAME descriptions, you don't really have a global outreach. And so this is critical. And we also need to make it possible for outside institutions to access our BIBFRAME database. And they're currently not able to do this. The BIBFRAME editor will go on improving that. We're doing enhancements all the time. Some of them are very obvious. You can see them. And now that the tool is more stable, we're able to concentrate more on functionality. Perhaps the one that the world's waiting for most of all is the conversion from BIBFRAME to MARC. And this is a huge undertaking. LC is working with a contractor to accomplish this task, but a good deal of this work falls on the shoulders of the NDMSO staff members. Once the specifications are written, LC then has to determine if the converted BIBFRAME to MARC records can be loaded into LC's ILS. And we recognize already that some tough decisions may have to be made to accomplish this task, but that's not the end of it. They then have to go through a thorough testing to make sure that they're being accepted the way we need to have them accepted. And only when this is done can the staff members at LC catalog just in BIBFRAME and not have to duplicate their work as they do right now, because they do the record in BIBFRAME and then they do the record again in the LC ILS. When this occurs, LC will be able to swell its pool of catalogers working in BIBFRAME. Exactly when this will happen, and it will go beyond 100, I don't know, but anything will be possible once we can convert from BIBFRAME to MARC. Now let's take a look at the task facing COIN. One of the biggies facing us is a BIBFRAME editor manual. Believe it or not, BIBFRAME pilot started in 2015. Yes, it's almost 4 years ago that we started. At that time, we created training materials and we made them public. But since then, we've moved to BIBFRAME Pilot 2.0. And we did revise these training materials, but that was back in 2017. Since that time, we've made a lot of upgrades and we've documented these improvements, but we've never pulled them together. So they're scattered all over the place. And now we've got to pull them all together into a BIBFRAME editor manual. Now this manual will focus on the LC BIBFRAME editor, but we will make it available. And we're going to publish it online and we're going to update it monthly. And every page will have a date on it, so you'll be able to tell when it was updated. And at the same time, we're also going to be creating cheat sheets or at-a-glance materials for new features that we bring out. Another big thing that we're doing is BIBFRAME training. And here we're not doing training just for the LC staff, but we're also doing some for the PCC cohort. That is the 17 institutions that are working in the Synopia BIBFRAME. When we work with the cohort, we've done some of this training already, and we're going to try and make it accessible. The last piece of training that we'll do for those 17 PCC institutions will be giving them some training on the Synopia BIBFRAME editor. At that time, we'll bow out of it and let the PCC members support each other. And we will turn our attention to augmenting the LC BIBFRAME pilot participants pool, because we've got to get it to 100 by the end of September. So in June, we'll have them looking at some readings and videos and things that we want them to absorb before they come into the classroom. And in July, we'll have classroom training for the new participants. And we will make all our training materials accessible, and they'll probably be loaded on the Cataloger's Learning Workshop page with links from other areas. And finally, we come to this participants pool that we have to expand. And in the process of expanding it, we're encouraging something that has been going on already, and that is we're encouraging divisions that have quite a few participants in the pool to have regular meetings within the divisions, and NDMSO and COIN staff come to those meetings to try and help them. And we're trying also this year, which is something we've not done in the past, and we really need to do, and that is track all the requests from the pilot participants for improvements to the BIBFRAME editor. and also not only to track these, but also to track the decisions we reach and to provide them with feedback, because sometimes their suggestions are absolutely excellent, but we're not in a position to implement them. But this will be a great tool, because once we start doing this on a regular basis, the catalogers in the BibFrame pilot will know that we're listening to them, that we're recording what they want, and that we're doing our utmost to meet all their needs. So that basically is all our goals for FY 2019. So I'm now going to turn it over to Sally McCallum.
Good afternoon, and I'm going to talk about something a little bit more basic in the project. Judith has given you a good overview of where we are and how we're trying to organize ourselves, but a major issue in planning for BibFrame is MARC. In fact, we have to be able to go into MARC, we have to be able to get out of MARC. And so I'm going to examine some of the issues that we're working with right now, in particular in being able to convert our data from BibFrame to MARC so that we can run some processes and make them available in MARC to the public for those people who still need that. First of all, I want to look at the MARC to BibFrame briefly, because we have more or less achieved that. We did a lot of elimination of duplication when we went from MARC to BibFrame. We dropped a lot of indicators and codes that were no longer relevant, such things as added entry, no added entry, that have been needed 30 years ago, maybe in MARC, but they haven't been needed for a very long time. We converted codes and data strings like names to URIs when we convert our data from MARC to BibFrame. We differentiate statements, which are transcription and access forms of information. So the statements, the transcription statements will have not so much control on them, but the access forms will, and will be able to be access points. And we split data into parts with emphasis on relationships. Splitting it into parts is a major problem then when going back into MARC, because we have to put it all back together again. So I want to look at these issues, the data model issues of the MARC data model versus the BibFrame. I want to look at our treatment of non-Latin script. We tried a different policy in BibFrame, and so which causes us some issues when going back into MARC. We've added all these URIs to the data. We need to get those URIs. We'd like to get those URIs back into MARC when we come back into it. We have missing punctuation because the BibFrame essentially omits terminal punctuation, and we need to make decisions on what we do when we come back into MARC. And then there are several other items I want to look at. And some say that once they go from MARC to BibFrame, they don't need to go back again, but we do. We have around 300 catalogers, and we've only got, as Judith said, 48 right now doing BibFrame, and we're hoping to ramp that up to 100. But our database of record is still MARC, so we've got to have a MARC record for everything they input into BibFrame. So as a result, now they're double keying. They're doing their BibFrame description, and then they go into the MARC system and do the MARC description. So we need to be able to convert that BibFrame into MARC and to eliminate that. We need flexibility. So we need easy transformations from BibFrame to MARC and MARC to BibFrame. We think that we will be transforming multiple times back and forth as we receive MARC from other agencies, as we need to send MARC to other agencies. And then there will be data that is in MARC that we need to transfer in BibFrame. We need to supply the full MARC records and the full BibFrame descriptions, we think, for a very long time in the foreseeable future. We really don't know, but we've got to build in some flexibility. And many systems, even though they say they don't think they'll need MARC in the future when they are more fully BibFrame, they will probably still have subsystems that are going to try to grab that BibFrame record, and they'd rather see it in a MARC picture, as a MARC picture. So the issues. One issue are the data models. As you know, the MARC data model is a unit record. We have everything in one record, essentially. The subjects, the descriptions, the ICD areas, a number of links, work titles, even the uniform title is in the bibliographic record. And we embed a different media also in that same record. We will say, we will do a record for the print, and then we will add little information that says we've also got electronic, and more information that says we've got a microform. We sometimes embed different physical media that copy information in that same record. So we have in the case of AV material, moving image, we have the paper print, we have the 16mm master, we have the 16mm reference print. We have, for books, we have library binding, we have paperback, and we put those all on one MARC record that for the moving image or for the book, and rather than having separate records. Now, BibFrame splits information out into works, which is essentially the RDA work expression, into instances, which is essentially the RDA manifestation, and items. The work has is a conceptual focus with subjects, authorized access points. The instances for the different media, and the items are for the different physical copies of an instance. So those things that were embedded and put together in the MARC unit record will be split out into work instance item records in the BibFrame environment. So how are we going to repackage this data? We've got a BibFrame work. Do we take it into and make it into a MARC title authority, or do we make it into a MARC bibliographic work? We don't have bibliographic works right now in the MARC environment, but that would certainly be the easier way if we want flexibility going from BibFrame to MARC and then MARC to BibFrame. If we could just do BibFrame works to MARC works to BibFrame works. So it could mean a difference in the way we do our bibliographic records in the MARC environment. Another issue is the repackaging is that we have a BibFrame work, and then we have a BibFrame instance for the print and a BibFrame instance for the electronic. When we go back into MARC, as I mentioned before, we generally had the print and electronic on one bibliographic record. We had a bibliographic record which embedded information about both the print and the electronic. Or we could go back into MARC and we could say, okay, we will do a MARC bibliographic record for the print, and we'll do a separate MARC bibliographic record for the electronic. That would certainly make it easier if we're going to go back and forth to go from BibFrame to MARC and MARC to BibFrame. Another issue has to do with the non-Latin script in our records. And this, if any of you do non-Latin script, this will be very familiar to you. That we put all of our non-Latin script information in 80 fields, and we link those fields to the regular field that contains a transliteration of that data. You see there one example of an 880 that is a title, obviously, because it links to the 245. So the 245 contains a transliterated version of that title that's in the $A. So we transliterate a lot of data in our bibliographic records, our MARC bibliographic records. The authority format, though, uses something that we call Model B. It's the MARC Model B, which says that you don't use 880s, but you put the transliterated and the Latin and the non-Latin both in the regular fields. And we use that in the authority format. Now, there's some reasons why that works better in this, more easily, let's say, in the authority format than it does in the bibliographic format. But in BibFrame, we decided that we would eliminate this so much transliteration of descriptive information. And the transcribed data is primarily only in the script of the resource. That's the transcribed data. That's the title statement, the statement of responsibility, edition statement, publication statement, all in the original script. Then the instance manifestation or manifestation, whichever one you want to call it, description is linked to the work and to names. And there you'll find transliteration of titles and of contributors. So the impact on MARC bibliographic records, when we take this BibFrame description that has so much more vernacular or non-Latin data information and no transliteration of it, when we take it back into the MARC record, the use of the 880 fields has got to be changed. Another issue are the URIs from the MARC record, from the BibFrame record. Now, it's many of the elements in the MARC record have a $0 or a $4, which are subfields that can contain a URI. And there's an example on the screen of the MARC data before conversion to BibFrame. A 700 field that has a person's name and their role, translator. And then we converted that record to BibFrame. Then we used the BibFrame to MARC conversion and converted it back. And we see we have a lot more data. We have the person's name, we have the role, but we also have a URI in the $0 for the name and a URI in the $4 for the role, the translator role. So our data is enriched. We want to have that data, we want to have those URIs when we go back into MARC, because we may, the next day, want to transform that data, that record, back into BibFrame, and we want to not have to look up this information again. We want to carry it with us. Another example is the 336, where you tell some form of the record is that the record is in text, and as you see, when we go into a BibFrame, we have the fact that it's text, which RDA says write it out in full, and that we use it, the list, the RDA content list, and then we transform it back. We have actually the code for it, we have the text, we have the literal text, and we also have a URI for this literal. So we have richer data. But then things get more complicated. Here we have a subfield. We don't have a capability. We have really fairly reasonable capability to put URIs in MARC records, in MARC record fields at the field level. But in this example, we have a subject, women lawyers and women lawyers -- fiction, and when we transform it to BibFrame, BibFrame looks up the whole subject heading, women lawyers, and pulls the URI. It then looks up each part. It looks up women lawyers and it looks up fiction, and it pulls the URI for each of those. So when we transform that data back from BibFrame to MARC, we have the first $0 is in fact the one for the whole subject heading, women lawyers fiction, whereas the next one is the URI only for women lawyers, and the third one is the URI only for fiction. So this is because we're tied to trying to keep them in the same order so that we can know which URI goes with which label when we get into the MARC. And because we don't have the ability to put URIs at the subfield level. And another issue that we've dealt with, we'll be dealing with, and some people would call it positive because we are eliminating a lot of punctuation. There's no punctuation at the end of elements in BibFrame. So in the first example of the 300, in a MARC field, you would have a, I believe it's a colon after pages in a MARC field, in a MARC record. But this one has been transformed from BibFrame, so it has no colon, and because the punctuation is eliminated. The second example is a 245, a title example, and you would normally find the ISBD / after rain in the MARC record, and you would also find a period after the last name of the translator, Bauer. You would find a period, but we because these things are missing in BibFrame, they're missing when they come back into MARC. I note though that if some punctuation is internal to a literal string, it's not eliminated, it's not tampered with. So the ISBD semicolon between Claudia Winter and translated is still there. It was there in the MARC, and it's still there, and it's there in the BibFrame, and it's still there when you come back into MARC. So, in summary, where are we? So far, we've found that our BibFrame to MARC records are structurally sound. That is a first and very important attribute. We found that the URIs are carried into MARC, which will make it easier to go back and forth. We find that we don't have punctuation at subfield boundaries, and I think there's a movement in the community to cease doing some of the punctuation at the subfield boundaries. So that may be a positive for going back and forth, if the community can accept that. Another thing that we notice in these records is that when we may have had a 260 in MARC when we went into BibFrame, but when we come back from BibFrame, everything maps into 264s because 264s have a little bit more information. They identify the roles of the provider. But we still have issues to reconcile, and they're significant. We have the MARC bibliographic works. What are we going to do about the works and the title authority records? And then we have the URIs at the subfield level. Since the Library of Congress is trying to move to, in this fiscal year, which ends at the end of September, to having more catalogers, we have to solve these problems in the very short run. So I thank you very much this is the progress we've made so far, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Ford.
Good afternoon, everybody. In the interest of giving you all a broad introduction of the types of things that we're looking at here, from education and authoring tutorials and cataloging materials to future hurdles with transforming BibFrame back into MARC, I bring even a technical element to what we're doing today with respect to taking our existing BibFrame data and trying to make it and publish it on the web. So I wanted to talk to you about anonymous resources, which are also blank notes, with a little bit of time spent on providers. Anonymous resources are a concept in RDF, which stands for Resource Description Framework. One of the things to know about anonymous resources is they are RDF resources like any other RDF resource. The term or phrase blank nodes is frequently used as a synonym for an anonymous resource. In short, an anonymous resource, as the name would suggest, has no identity or has no clearly defined identity. It certainly doesn't have a strong identity. And that is to be contrasted against resources that have a clear identity or otherwise have strong identity. And you can see where a anonymous resource is used versus a strongly identified resource just in this example that you can see on your screen right now. So this is a snippet of RDF. The top example, the BF topic that you can see that has the RDF about attribute and a lengthy string there that begins id.loc.gov is a strongly identified resource. It has a clear identifier. It has an HTTP URI. Below that is the same RDF resource representation of a work with the same subject, with the same topic, except for you'll notice that the RDF about is missing. And that's because it has no strong identifier. It's anonymous in this particular sense. Looking at a slightly different representation, you can see the blank node or the identifier for the anonymous resource, which is the blank node in this case, manifest. So this is the exact same RDF, slightly different serialization that you were looking at a moment ago. In the top example, you can see that strong identifier, that HTTP URI that goes to id.loc.gov. And down below, instead, you can see something that begins with an underscore followed by a colon, followed by the letter N, E3, so on and so forth. That is the blank node. It is considered in this sense a weak identifier. And that's basically the distinction between an anonymous resource and a non-anonymous resource. An RDF resource may be identified with a URI or blank node. If it's strongly identified, it has a URI, and there are a lot of benefits to that. An HTTP URI is shareable. It is usable beyond a specific system, and it is reusable relatively easily within a specific system. Conversely, anonymous resources are identified by blank nodes. A blank node is not shareable. They are not usable beyond a specific system, and they are typically not reusable even within a specific system. And they can be very difficult to, difficult to reuse within a specific system is what I was going to say. So they are a reality, and if you have developers, or if you are a developer yourself and you've worked with RDF and you've encountered these anonymous resources, you might have grumbled, or you've heard some grumbling about them. But the reality is they are a fact of life. It's just that period. Just that simple, period. They're part of the process. Our raw transformation that takes a MARC bibliographic record and converts it into BibFrame just inserts anonymous resources or blank nodes wherever it can, because it essentially the MARC record has no URI in it. It's the absence of a strong identifier. You have to use some kind of identifier, and in that case we use an anonymous resource. And finally, you could ask yourself a more theoretical question such as, should everything really have a URI? URIs, once minted, imply a commitment. You need to honor them ideally. You need to manage them. So, point being, anonymous resources are a fact of life. BibFrame and blank nodes have been very common from the beginning, and I'm fairly zen about them, but recently they've been a particular bugaboo for me for a variety of different reasons. One, because I think it is important to give strong identity to those things that require strong identity. Two, using anonymous resources results in tremendous duplication of resources within a system. We'll talk about that in a second. The number of anonymous resources are causing or will cause performance and scaling issues. And finally, BibFrame, like MARC, is about exchanging bibliographic information. It stands to reason, therefore, that slimmer, more concise, more readable resources are better for exchange. And so now I figured I'd spend a moment, having introduced everyone to those high-level concepts, to look at a few examples and focus on what we're calling a provider's file. And here you can see another snippet of RDF, color-coded this time. Specifically, what I really want you looking at is inside of the provision activity, you'll see that thing called an agent, Columbia, and the label which is Columbia Pictures Home Entertainment. You'll note that there is no RDF about attribute on the BF agent element. This is RDF XML, and therefore it has no strong identity. What you're essentially looking at is an anonymous resource, the label of which is Columbia Pictures Home Entertainment. Well, we have, you can imagine, many of these in our, that come out of our raw transformation. If you take very rough numbers, and you can assume we have 18 million MARC bib records, let's then further presume that those 18 million MARC bib records would result in roughly 15 million anonymous blank nodes for provider agent resources alone. When you consider popular publishers or distributors or manufacturers, many or most of these represent the same entity. Think of such providers or publishers as Harcourt Brace or Penguin Books or HarperCollins. And in fact, what we did is we took all of those labels out of the system, and when we did, we discovered we only had, out of the 15 million anonymous provider agent resources, we discovered that we in fact only had about 1.2 million unique providers in the system. And so what we did is we took that 1.2 million, we continued to work on it a little bit, and we created a providers file. It is experimental. I can't stress that enough. We are testing this out, working with it internally, seeing how it works for us with respect to how our catalogers are using it and how we are going to use it, or how we may use it when publishing BibFrame data on the web. And so we took the file and we loaded it to id.loc.gov. You can see a screenshot of the main page here. And we're going to step through one or two of these. But one of the things I wanted to show you is an example of one of the HTML representations of one of these providers. In this case, it's Harcourt Brace & Company. One of the things I'd like to draw your attention to is that list of variants. There are roughly 10 or 11 of them right there. You'll see there are variations, Harcourt, Brace & Co. with a capital C, Harcourt Brace & Company, all lowercase, sometimes the capital C, so on and so forth. One of the things that we did is we didn't just take the 1.2 million and extract them and insert them into another system. We attempted to figure out if we could take how many of those 1.2 million we could merge together, because they essentially represent the same entity, in this case Harcourt Brace & Company. And what you see with all those variants is a distinct label that we extracted from the bibliographic data that we were able to say, this is the same as this, and merge them all together in order to create essentially one identifier for this publisher, Harcourt Brace & Company. One of the other things that we noticed when we did this, wasn't intentional, but was kind of a very happy circumstance, is the same thing happened with providers that have been inserted into 880s that Sally was talking about earlier. One of the things we need to do in a future transformation is connect the 880s with the 260s that they in fact relate to. But as you can see in this particular example, the same merging algorithm worked also on this Arabic example. We have taken the data and we've loaded it and we've configured our in-house BibFrame editor to go against this data set, so our catalogers can use it when cataloging a book or some other piece of material such as a DVD. You'll see that button with a name test. When you click on that button, you'll be presented with a new window, and if you start typing in the example you can see on the screen as HarperCollins, you'll see suddenly a drop-down, HarperCollins Children's, HarperCollins Children's Books, HarperCollins College Publications, so on and so forth, from which you can actually choose one of those. And once you choose one of those, after that, and you go on and save the item that you're the BibFrame resource that you're cataloging to the system, in addition to containing the label HarperCollins Children's Books, it will in fact contain a URI for that. And in that way, we've gone from having a system full of anonymous resources to a system with resources that have been strongly identified. And in the final example here, you'll see that similarly formatted piece of RDF XML, but in this case, The agent, which is about 2/3 down the example, now has an RDF about attribute associated with it and a URI that you'll see goes to id.loc.gov. And that brings me to the end. It is all online. That URI, I'm just now noticing, is slightly wrong. It's not called BF entities, it's just called entities. But we'll get that corrected once these slides are published, and invite you guys to check it out. And from this point on, it's Paul.
Hi everyone, it's Paul Frank. I'm going to go very quickly here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about id.loc.gov. You heard Sally and Kevin talk about all these URIs that we're putting into BibFrame descriptions, but you might be wondering, where are those URIs coming from? Well, we get them from our linked data service, id.loc.gov. Now, the view that you see on the screen here is about 10 years ago. When id.loc.gov was first launched, it had about 6 controlled vocabularies in it. And as the BibFrame pilot grew and we had a need to create more URIs in our BibFrame descriptions, the Library of Congress has enhanced id.loc.gov to the point now where it has over 90 controlled vocabularies that are wonderful for URIs, but now present a slight problem if you're searching for them. So a wonderful search layer has been added onto id.loc.gov that you can use almost as a discovery layer for identifying vocabularies. On this slide here, I did a basic search on linked data, the phrase linked data across all of id.loc.gov, and I got back 5 results. You can see them, the circle or square around the center under vocabulary. One from LCSH, several from the name authority file, and then one from the entity providers that Kevin just discussed. You can also facet those searches within id.loc.gov, as you see in this upper left-hand corner, where you can limit and target the type of vocabulary that you want to identify. So this is a discovery layer within id.loc.gov that you can use now. But I want to look towards the future and how we might envision id.loc.gov being used. And on this final slide, you see bibliographic resources finally accessed through id.loc.gov. This is not something that you can see now outside of LC, but this is what our BibFrame participants see when they go into the BibFrame database. So they're able now to treat this version or this prototype of id.loc.gov as a discovery layer for describing resources in BibFrame. So it's a future possible view of how we might see this, but I like to think about the positive aspects of our BibFrame pilot and how we might see that reflected in the future. That's all I had. I think now we're ready to open it up for questions for the audience.
Great. Thanks very much to our LC team, Judith, Sally, Kevin, and Paul. This has been very informative. We appreciate your sharing your expertise with us. And for the audience now, as Paul mentioned, we have time for questions. So please go ahead and enter your questions in the questions box if you haven't already. Okay, and while folks are typing in their questions, there are several questions that have come in already. So I'll get us started with some of our earlier questions here. Here's a question. Let me see. Okay. The first question, will there be a projected timeline for the implementation for BibFrame beyond the testing and training? Do you have that information yet?
Okay. There isn't this is Judith. There isn't a timeline yet. Each year we inch closer, but as you can see, there's a lot that we still need to do. Like, we need to understand more about the discovery layer. We need to understand how the public's going to interact. It may be that to just use the BIBFRAME database down the road as our master database, but at the same time keep the MARC database. But all of this has to be worked out, and we're not there yet. But whatever happens, we have to maintain our MARC database, because the library community around the world depends on our MARC database. And we realize that many libraries are not going to be able to convert to BIBFRAME right away. But we are moving further and further forward on this. And on April the 2nd, we're going to have a presentation here at the Library of Congress in what's called the ELCTS Digital Future in You program. And we're going to talk about BIBFRAME goes international, and talking about how it's being used and looked at around the world. So that will be something that will be filmed, and we'll let people know when the film is accessible.
Great, thank you. Here's a question. What should libraries be doing right now with BIBFRAME other than follow Library of Congress's progress? Is there anything libraries need to be doing?
This is Sally McCallum. I'm not sure. It depends on the library and their situation, but there are a lot of libraries, in fact, that are going to be doing some work with BIBFRAME because they're members of a Linked Data for Production project grant that is headed by Stanford. Then we have the BIBFRAME editor that our catalogers use. We make that available to play with, experiment with, on bibframe.org, a website we own, and you can go in there and just experiment and see what it's like, see what you like or don't like, or give you ideas about what things you like to do something with. But other than that, I don't see that. If you have a system, you have resources you need to catalog, you have patrons you need to serve, and there's not a whole lot you can do without being a member of some group or something that provides you with a system.
Great, thank you. Next question. Do you anticipate any additional content designation to be added to MARC to support the BIBFRAME to MARC conversion?
That's a very good question. It's one that we are working with right now. I think it would be minimal, let me put it that way, but there may be some things that are missing also that have been in our MARC records that are not very important, or we really haven't used them for years, and they won't be in the MARC records in the future. I don't see much else that right now we don't see very much content designation that we might want to add.
Okay, great, thank you. And we have time for one more question. I'm actually combining questions from two people for this particular question. Do you still need participants in the BIBFRAME pilot? And if so, how are members of the pilot participant pool determined? How can folks participate?
We actually allow people to volunteer. We do try, this is Judith Cannan, beg your pardon, we do try to make sure that we get people from all different areas and different types of materials, etc. We haven't had a lot of difficulty in this area. I think just about every cataloger of cartographic materials is involved. All the music catalogers, a lot of staff from MBRS and Recorded Sound are participating, and we've got one rare book cataloger, and we've got another one to join, and we've got somebody from Prints and Photographs, and so they're not under the ABA directorate, but the ABA directorate, it's people have been able to volunteer, but now that we need to swell it to 52, we're going to, the 52 more catalogers, we're probably going to have to say to divisions, you have to supply X number of persons. But first of all, we have a great deal of interest from our overseas offices. I don't know if everyone's aware that we have 6 overseas offices, one in Cairo, Nairobi, New Delhi, Islamabad, Jakarta, and Rio de Janeiro. And 4 of those field offices want to participate in BIBFRAME. So we'll take their numbers and then we'll go back out to the divisions and say to the divisions, you have to provide X number of people that are going to work in BIBFRAME. But usually we hope that they're going to come out of the woodwork and volunteer because they make better pilot participants if they do that. Because they are experimental and they are having to do their work twice.
Great. Thank you. We do have some remaining questions that were submitted. Our presenters have kindly offered to answer any remaining questions in writing. Those answers will be emailed to attendees when we send out the slides and the recording. We're glad that you could all be with us today. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan future events. The email will also include links to today's slides and recording. You now have the opportunity to receive a certificate of attendance. That information will also be in the email. Thanks again to our presenters, Sally McCallum, Judith Cannan, Kevin Ford, and Paul Frank. Thanks also to members of the Continuing Education Committee, Iping Chen Gaffey and Joseph Olivares, and to Alana Warren from the ALCTS office. The support they provide make it possible for us to present these webinars. ALCTS has other continuing education events coming up. Our next webinar, scheduled for April 3rd, will discuss assessment in technical services. Please see the ALCTS website to register or find more information on these events. ALCTS also offers web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long, as well as 2-day email discussions. Our next e-forum, Assessing Collections for Diversity and Inclusion, will be on April 16th. Please check the website for information on upcoming courses and discussions. Thank you all for joining us today, and this concludes our session.